The screams hit before I even stepped outside. Chlorine-scented air, mixed with chaos. Victoria Whitmore, the mighty HOA president, was thrashing in my pool, her perfect blonde hair plastered to her face as she clawed at her skin. Around her, half a dozen guests were shouting, jumping out, scratching their arms like they'd fallen into a nest of fire ants. The water shimmered blue calm, almost mocking them. I stood at the patio door, glass of iced tea in hand, watching the scene like it was a matinee performance. Victoria turned toward me, her face red and furious. "You poisoned us, Anthony. I'm calling the police." I took a slow sip, looked her straight in the eyes, and said softly, "Funny. I don't remember inviting you." Sirens began echoing down the street. Neighbors peeked from behind their fences. And as the flashing lights painted my backyard red and blue, I couldn't help but think maybe peace finally had a price. Before we dive into this wild story, drop your location and local time in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more HOA chaos just like this. They say every man has his version of the American dream. Mine wasn't a fancy yacht or a penthouse in the city, it was peace. A quiet backyard, a blue swimming pool that reflected the sky, and enough space to breathe after 25 years of 9-to-5 chaos. When I first moved into Maplewood Heights, the neighborhood felt like paradise. Manicured lawns, clean sidewalks, polite waves from strangers. The kind of place that made you think, finally I can relax. For the first few months, that dream held true. I'd come home from work, fire up the grill, take a dip in the pool as the sun went down, and feel the tension slide off my shoulders. My backyard was my sanctuary, a small blue kingdom of silence. Then one Sunday morning, the illusion cracked. I remember stepping out with a cup of coffee, half asleep, still in my robe, and nearly dropping the mug when I saw two teenagers splashing around in my pool. A boy and a girl, maybe 16, laughing like they owned the place. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was confusion. I thought maybe they'd wandered in by mistake, maybe their ball had rolled over. But then the girl waved casually. "Morning, Mr. Lewis." Mom said, "We could swim here since it's community property." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" That's when I heard the voice, sharp, commanding, and dripping with self-importance. Victoria Whitmore, standing on my driveway in oversized sunglasses and a floral dress, holding a clipboard like a badge of authority. "Oh, Anthony, I'm so sorry, the kids must have misunderstood. They just thought, since we're all part of the same HOA, it's kind of shared space." She smiled wide, the kind of smile that hides teeth. "Right," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Except it's literally fenced and attached to my house." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, of course. I'll make sure they know next time." Next time. Those two words should have been a warning. I didn't think much of it then. I let it go, figuring it was a simple mistake. But days later, I came home from work and heard music, faint, distant, coming from the backyard. When I opened the gate, I froze. The Whitmore kids were back, along with two of their friends, floating on my inflatable flamingo and sipping sodas like they were at a resort. "Hey, Mr. L," the boy called out. "Your pool's awesome." I stared at them, speechless. "Where's your mom?" And there she was again, appearing from behind the hedge like a villain making her grand entrance. "Anthony," she said brightly. "I was just telling them to wrap it up. You know how kids are." "Victoria, I'm trying to be polite, but this is private property." Her smile thinned. "Of course. I completely understand." She didn't understand. Not at all. By the end of that week, it had turned into a routine. Every afternoon when I came home, I'd find towels draped over my chairs, wet footprints on my deck, empty snack bags floating in the skimmer. One time her husband Doug, a man who always wore golf shirts and cologne thick enough to choke a horse, was sitting by the pool with a beer in hand. "Hey neighbor," he said with a grin. "You've really got this backyard thing figured out. HOA should give you a medal." I managed a stiff smile. "Or maybe they should give you your own pool." He laughed, missing the point completely. For a while I tried subtle hints, locking the side gate, leaving polite notes, even texting Victoria reminders about respecting property boundaries. Every time she replied the same way, "Oh, Anthony, you're overreacting. We're neighbors, not strangers." But the thing about neighbors like Victoria, they feed off politeness. The more you give, the more they take. Then came the letter. It was tucked neatly into my mailbox, sealed with the HOA's blue emblem. Notice of violation, aesthetic disruption, and noise complaint. I read it twice. Then a third time because it made no sense. It said that my pool activities had caused excessive noise and visual clutter inconsistent with HOA harmony standards. The kicker: it was signed by Victoria Whitmore, president of the Maplewood Heights HOA. I almost laughed. She had weaponized the HOA against me, using my own backyard as evidence. I walked over to her house that evening. She answered with that same smug smile, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, Anthony, did you get the notice? Nothing personal, I assure you. Just standard enforcement. We all have to follow the rules, right, I said evenly. Even the ones about trespassing." Her eyes flickered just for a second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, don't be dramatic. We're just trying to keep the neighborhood peaceful." Peaceful. That night, as I sat by the pool, the water still and silent under the porch light, I realized something important. People like Victoria don't respond to kindness. They see it as weakness. And I wasn't about to be the HOA's punching bag. So I started documenting everything. Every time her kids entered my yard, every piece of trash left behind, every noise, every trespass, every word. I had security cameras installed disguised as garden lights, a motion sensor by the gate, automatic timestamps. At first it wasn't about revenge, it was about proof. But the longer it went on, the more I realized that logic wouldn't stop, her humiliation would. The following weekend I overheard Victoria bragging to another neighbor about community gatherings at my pool. She had the audacity to say Anthony's space adds so much value to the neighborhood we practically consider it communal now. Communal. That word hit me like a slap. By the time the sun set that day, I knew I was done playing nice. I didn't shout, I didn't confront her. I just smiled and waved back like nothing was wrong. Inside, I started a different kind of project. I gathered my footage, organized dates, and filed a private incident log. But deep down, something else was brewing, not just frustration, but creativity. If Victoria wanted to turn my backyard into a public pool, I'd make sure her next visit was one she'd never forget. I cleaned the water that night, replaced the filters, checked the chlorine levels. Everything perfect, nothing suspicious. Because revenge, I've learned, doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and perfectly timed. And when I caught sight of Victoria across the fence the next morning watering her roses with that smug grin, I raised my coffee cup and nodded politely. She smiled back, thinking she'd won. She had no idea. By the next week, my backyard wasn't mine anymore. It had become some kind of unofficial neighborhood attraction. Every time I came home, I'd see towels hanging on my fence, flip-flops scattered on the deck, and half-eaten chips floating near the skimmer. My once peaceful sanctuary now looked like a public pool after a summer festival. The final straw came on a Saturday afternoon. I'd been stuck in traffic for hours, drained from a business trip, dreaming of nothing but a quiet swim. But when I turned the corner onto my street, I nearly slammed the brakes. My driveway was blocked by two SUVs, both parked diagonally across my property line. And from behind my house came the unmistakable sounds of splashing laughter and bad pop music. I followed the noise, and what I saw nearly made my blood boil. There were at least 20 people in my backyard. Victoria was lounging on one of my deck chairs, sipping a margarita. Her husband Doug was grilling burgers on my barbecue. Kids I didn't even recognize were cannonballing into my pool, screaming like banshees. I just stood there at the gate, frozen. I think one of them even waved at me like I was the guest. "Hey, Anthony," Victoria called out, her voice dripping with fake cheer. "Hope you don't mind, the kids wanted to have a little fun while the weather's nice. We'll clean up when we're done." I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt. "Victoria," I said slowly, "you're on my property." "Again," she waved lazily. "Oh, relax, we're all neighbors. What's the harm? You've got such a big heart and such a big pool." For a second I thought about losing it, about shouting, throwing everyone out, calling the police. But instead I took a deep breath. Because I realized something yelling wouldn't change anything. People like Victoria didn't understand boundaries. They only understood consequences. So I turned around, walked back into the house, and grabbed my phone. I opened the HOA bylaws I'd downloaded weeks ago and scrolled through. Section 4B, Property Access. Section 8C, Private Amenities. Section 11, Farads, Trespassing Liability. I started taking notes, smiling to myself as I sipped water from the fridge. While they partied, I recorded everything from the music volume to the number of guests. The security cameras captured every angle, every face, every beer can they left behind. When the sun started setting, I stepped outside again. The crowd was thinning out the music, finally fading. Victoria gave me that rehearsed, sugary smile. "See, we kept it under control this time." "Sure," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Just remember what you said." She tilted her head. "What did I say that you'd clean up when you're done?" Her smile faltered. By the time they left, my pool looked like a swamp. Floating chips, soggy napkins, beer cans on the grass, and wet footprints leading right to my porch. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my computer, editing the footage. Every trespass labeled, every timestamp clear. I wasn't angry anymore, I was methodical. I knew now that she'd crossed a line she couldn't talk her way out of. But Victoria wasn't done yet. 3 days later, I received another HOA notice in the mail. This one claimed I was creating visual disharmony by having excessive pool activity visible from neighboring homes. I laughed out loud. The woman who had turned my backyard into Club Med was now accusing me of causing a disturbance. That was the moment something in me snapped, not in rage but in focus. That evening, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. I passed the HOA's community board and noticed a freshly printed flyer, Maplewood Heights HOA, monthly pool safety meeting hosted by President Victoria Whitmore. It even had her smiling photo at the bottom. I actually laughed. Pool safety, I muttered to myself. You've got some nerve. When I got home, I found Doug across the street watering the lawn. He waved his hose like a greeting. Hey, Tony Vic says thanks for letting us use the pool again. We really appreciate it. Yeah, I said flatly. I'm sure you do. He chuckled. You know it's good for the neighborhood spirit, brings people together. I smiled faintly. It's about to bring a lot of people together, Doug. Just not the way you think. That night I went into my shed and checked my security setup, the cameras, the motion detectors, everything. It was all in place. But that's when another idea crept in. A different kind of solution. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to sue. I was going to teach. I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar itch powder pool harmless prank. I'd heard of it before. A harmless but devilishly effective powder that caused mild skin irritation, especially in water. It wasn't toxic. It wasn't permanent. It just made people itch like crazy. Perfect. I ordered a few packets, the kind used in college pranks, and waited. During those few days, I played the part of the polite neighbor. I waved at Victoria. I complimented her roses. I even offered her leftover pool cleaning supplies. She thought she'd won. But I was counting down the days. The package arrived Thursday morning. Plain brown box. Discreet. Inside were 3 small bags of fine white powder, looked like sugar, felt like victory. Saturday afternoon, the weather turned perfect, sunny, calm, not a cloud in sight, and right on schedule, Victoria's yard exploded with activity. Tables, chairs, speakers, coolers. She was hosting another community pool event. My pool, of course. At 6 a.m., before the chaos began, I stepped outside with a coffee mug and my little brown box. The neighborhood was still asleep. I walked to the pool, sprinkled the powder gently into the water, and turned on the filter jets. It dissolved instantly invisible. Then, I went back inside, made breakfast, and waited. Around noon, I heard the familiar sounds, laughter, doors, slamming, splashes, music. I peeked through the blinds. There they were again. Victoria, Doug, and half the neighborhood lounging like royalty. For the next 10 minutes, everything seemed normal. Then came the first scream. A woman shouted, "Something's biting me." Another yelled, "My arms, they're on fire." Kids started crying, adults splashing toward the edges, scratching furiously. Chaos erupted. Victoria shot up, covered in red blotches, screaming at her husband. "What did you put in the water?" Doug shouted back. "I didn't touch anything." From my kitchen window, I couldn't stop smiling. I stepped outside, casually, glass of iced tea in hand, just in time to see the full spectacle. People slipping, screaming, falling into each other. The once communal pool now looked like a war zone of itching chaos. Victoria locked eyes with me, fury blazing. "You did this," she shrieked. "You poisoned us, Anthony." I took a slow sip and said calmly, "You mean my private property, the one you broke into again?" Her jaw dropped. "You'll pay for this," she screamed. I tilted my head. "You mean like the last 6 months of unpaid HOA dues you owe?" The look on her face was priceless. Shock, rage, disbelief. As she grabbed her phone to call 911, I turned to go back inside. Not to hide, just to wait. Because I knew what was coming next. The sound of sirens was already faint in the distance, and for the first time since I'd moved to Maplewood Heights, I actually felt relaxed. Because finally the fun part was about to begin. When the sirens finally faded into the neighborhood, I was already sitting in my patio chair, legs crossed, watching the mayhem unfold like a movie. Victoria's guests were still panicking, scratching, yelling, running across my grass like a swarm of ants on fire. One man was rubbing his back against my fence post. Another was screaming into a garden hose, trying to wash off the chemical burn. I took a slow sip of my drink. Ice clinked softly. It was almost poetic, all that chaos echoing off the calm surface of the pool. The police arrived in record time, 2 cruisers' lights flashing red and blue across the blue water. Officers jumped out, scanning the scene with that look that says, "What the hell did we just walk into?" Victoria stormed toward them. Her hair a tangled mess, her expensive sundress soaked through. "Officers, she shouted, voice trembling between outrage and hysteria. He poisoned us. He put something in that water. She pointed at me as if she'd just caught a serial killer. I stayed perfectly still in my chair, glass of iced tea still in hand. Good afternoon, officers, I said calmly. You might want to ask them why they were in my backyard in the first place. One of the officers, a tall man with a weary face, frowned. Sir, is this your property? Yes, I said, handing him a printed copy of my deed conveniently kept in a folder by the patio door. Everything inside this fence line is private. You can check the address. Victoria's voice rose an octave. Don't listen to him. He's lying. He's been hostile for months. I'm the HOA president. We have rights to shared amenities. The officer's brow furrowed. Shared amenities. She gestured wildly at my pool. The water is visible from other homes. It counts as a community visual space. He can't legally keep it to himself. The officer blinked slowly, clearly trying to process what he'd just heard. Then he turned back to me. You got that on camera, sir, I smiled. Every second, I led him to my tablet and pulled up the security feed. 4 different camera angles clear as day. Footage of Victoria's family hopping my fence, unlocking the gate with a copied key, and hosting their full-blown pool party without my consent. The officer nodded grim. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Victoria's face went pale. You can't just. She stopped mid-sentence when the second officer approached, radioing in the situation. Dispatch, confirming trespassing on private property. Multiple parties involved. Her friends began to scatter barefoot, embarrassed, clutching towels like fugitives. Her husband Doug tried to speak up. Officer, I think this is all a misunderstanding. But then one of the guests, a red-faced man, scratching his arm, blurted out, Man, my skin's on fire. He put something in that water. The officer turned to me again. Sir, did you put anything chemical in the pool? I nodded calmly. Chlorine, yes. Standard maintenance levels, same as every Saturday morning. You can test it if you like. He radioed for a test kit. Within 10 minutes, the results came back. No harmful substances detected. Just normal chlorine and trace minerals. The silence that followed was delicious. Victoria stood there trembling with anger, her face a mix of disbelief and humiliation. You planned this, she spat. I shrugged. You planned the party. I just kept the cameras rolling. Her eyes burned holes through me. You think you're clever. You won't get away with this. I smiled faintly. I already have. That was when she lost it. Before anyone could react, she lunged forward and punched me in the shoulder. It wasn't much of a hit, more of a flailing slap really, but it was enough. The tall officer grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her back. Ma'am, that's assault, he said firmly. Calm down or you'll be placed under arrest. He's the criminal, she screamed, twisting in his grip. He's poisoning the community. The second officer moved in, cuffing her hands behind her back. Doug stood frozen, looking helpless. One of the kids started crying. Ma'am, the officer said as he read her rights, you're being detained for trespassing and assault. The crowd had gathered by now curious neighbors peeking from driveways and windows. A few whispered, others recorded on their phones. I leaned against the fence watching it all play out. For months, Victoria had humiliated me, sending HOA warnings, twisting the rules, and turning my own home into her playground. And now in front of everyone she was being escorted to a patrol car in handcuffs, barefoot dripping, wet covered in red blotches. I'll admit it, I smiled. Maybe I even enjoyed it. The officer looked at me once more. Sir, we'll need you to file a statement at the station later. Shouldn't take long. No problem, I said. I'll bring the footage. Victoria shouted as they put her in the car. You'll regret this. You'll regret it, Anthony. I raised my glass to her. Already regretted letting you swim. The door slammed and the cruiser drove off. The silence that followed was the sweetest I'd heard in months. The only sound left was the faint hum of my pool filter. Doug lingered awkwardly by the fence, scratching at his arms. Look, Anthony, I didn't think it'd go this far. Neither did I. I said my voice even. But maybe now it'll finally stop. He didn't reply. He just nodded, picked up a wet towel from the grass, and walked home with his head down. When I went back inside, I played the footage again, just to be sure. Every detail was perfect. The trespassing, the unauthorized gathering, the assault. Clean legal evidence. I poured myself another drink and sank into my chair. For the first time in months, my backyard was empty. Quiet, mine. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, I woke up to find emails flooding my inbox, all from HOA members. Some angry, some apologetic. Apparently, the story had already spread across the neighborhood chat group. The subject line said it all. HOA, president arrested after backyard incident. By noon, the HOA board had called for an emergency meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The damage was done. Later that evening, I took a short walk. As I passed Victoria's house, the curtains were drawn. No lights, no music, no laughter. For the first time since she moved in, her yard was silent. I looked across at my own property, my clean, private pool glimmering under the porch light. I couldn't help but smirk. "Peace," I muttered, "looks good on me." I should have been satisfied. But deep down, I knew people like Victoria didn't just vanish quietly. She'd come back one way or another, and when she did, I wanted to make sure her downfall was complete. So I spent that week preparing the final touches, copies of the footage, printed statements, HOA bylaw references, and one little surprise I planned to drop off at the next meeting. A simple envelope labeled for HOA records, property use violations, and leadership misconduct. Inside, a USB drive. Victoria's entire reign neatly documented. Every petty fine, every manipulation, every trespass. By the time the next board session rolled around, I didn't even have to show up. The neighbors did the work for me. Victoria's name was voted off the board unanimously. And as poetic justice would have it, the meeting notes later recorded her final words before storming out of the clubhouse. "This neighborhood has gone to hell because of him. Maybe it had, or maybe it finally got better. Either way, my pool never looked more beautiful." You'd think that after being handcuffed and dragged out of my backyard, Victoria would have learned her lesson. But people like her, people who think rules exist for everyone else, don't learn. They retaliate. The very next morning, I found a note taped to my mailbox. Printed bold font, no signature, but I didn't need one. "Pending HOA investigation for property hazards and misuse of pool chemicals. Cease use until further notice." It was stamped with the HOA logo and clearly written on Victoria's old letterhead. The woman had been fired from her position less than 12 hours earlier, yet here she was still trying to pull the strings. I laughed out loud, crumpled the letter, and tossed it into the trash. It didn't take long for the neighborhood gossip mill to catch fire. People were texting, whispering, sharing memes. Someone even made a gif of Victoria being escorted to the police car with the caption, "HOA justice served." And I'll admit, that made me grin. But underneath the satisfaction, a small part of me was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Victoria wasn't just petty, she was vindictive. Sure enough, 3 days later she returned. It was a bright Wednesday afternoon. I was trimming the hedge when her silver SUV pulled up across the street. She stepped out wearing a wide-brimmed hat, huge sunglasses, and an expression so fake it could have been painted on. Doug followed behind, dragging a box of files like some exhausted servant. She strutted up to the edge of my driveway, voice dripping with fake civility. "Anthony," she began, "I came to apologize for the misunderstanding." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling trespassing and assault now?" Her smile didn't waver. Things got out of hand. The HOA board overreacted. I'm sure once they see reason, they'll reinstate me. But I wanted to clear the air with you first. I folded my arms. "You mean before your lawyer calls mine?" Her jaw tightened, but she forced a laugh. "You're clever, Anthony. But I know what you did. That powder, whatever it was, you're lucky nobody's suing you." I gave a slow nod. "You're right. I am lucky. The police test results said the pool was clean. So, unless your guests were allergic to justice, I think we're good." Her lips twitched. She wanted to scream but couldn't afford to. Instead, she gave me a cold, polite smile. "Enjoy your little victory. It won't last." Then she turned sharply, dragging Doug back into the car. I didn't see her again for a few days, but her presence lingered like a bad smell you can't quite locate. HOA letters kept arriving, anonymous complaints about property odor, unauthorized modifications, improper lighting, all nonsense. I knew who was behind it, but I didn't bite. Let her waste her ink. I had better plans. See, revenge wasn't just about payback. It was about elegance. And after months of humiliation, I wanted poetic justice, the kind that leaves a mark. So I decided to make my pool famous. One evening, while scrolling through my laptop, I found a local event service website that rented out private spaces for small parties and photo shoots. They were always looking for scenic locations, gardens, patios, even stylish backyards. I sent in a few photos of my pool-polished tiles, string lights, glimmering blue water under the sunset, and within a week I had 4 bookings. Small groups, all legitimate, all paying. By Saturday, my backyard wasn't just private again, it was profitable. And as fate would have it, the very first booking happened on the same day. Victoria's disciplinary hearing with the HOA board took place. That morning the air was crisp, the sun bright, and the neighborhood unusually quiet. I watched from my deck as a van pulled up carrying a photographer and a couple celebrating their engagement. They were polite, respectful, and genuinely grateful to use the space. I smiled. "Enjoy it, just don't invite the neighbors." They laughed, not realizing the joke wasn't really a joke. A few hours later, I heard the sound of a car door slamming across the street. Victoria had returned from her hearing, and by the look on her face, it hadn't gone well. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the couple in my pool area, at the photographer snapping shots under the golden light. Her expression twisted into disbelief. She marched across the street, heels clicking like gunfire, and shouted through the gate, "What is this? You can't rent out your property. It's against HOA policy." The photographer looked startled. Ma'am, we have permission, not from the HOA, you don't," she barked. "This is a residential zone." I stepped outside, waving cheerfully. "Afternoon, Victoria, you look tense." "Board meeting go well," her eyes flashed. "You think you can mock me, Anthony? This isn't over. You can't turn your pool into a business." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Actually, according to Section 3 Amperes of the HOA Charter, which you wrote, by the way, there's no restriction on private event hosting under 10 attendees. You might want to reread your own bylaws." Her face turned beet red. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, realizing she'd literally signed the rule herself years ago. I leaned against the gate. "Oh, and don't worry, I'll make sure everyone cleans up. Unlike some people." The couple giggled nervously. The photographer kept snapping pictures, pretending not to notice the storm brewing. Victoria pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're making a mockery of this neighborhood," I smiled. "No, Victoria, you already did that. I'm just charging admission." She sputtered, unable to find words. Then, with one last glare, she stormed off again. I went back inside, feeling that familiar warmth of satisfaction bubbling up. For once, I didn't need to yell or threaten. The world had finally learned what I'd known for months: when someone keeps pushing your boundaries, the best revenge isn't shouting, it's thriving so loudly they can't stand the sound of your success. Over the next week, bookings kept coming in. A small family photo shoot, a yoga class, even a birthday brunch. All calm, respectful people who loved the space, and every one of them signed a contract that included a special clause: unauthorized entry prohibited under HOA trespassing law. It was legal, poetic, and entirely satisfying. Every time a car arrived, Victoria peeked through her curtains, fuming silently. Her husband stopped waving at me altogether. Her kids avoided eye contact when they passed by on their bikes. By the time summer started to fade, her life had shrunk to her porch and the empty street. Then one day, a realtor's sign appeared in her yard. "For sale, by owner." I almost couldn't believe it. But the gossip confirmed it. After losing her HOA position and facing multiple fines for misuse of authority, Victoria was drowning in debt. Her pride wouldn't let her stay where everyone knew her downfall. The last time I saw her, she was loading boxes into her SUV. She caught me watching from my porch. For a long second, our eyes met, hers full of bitterness, mine calm and amused. She didn't say a word. She just slammed the car door and drove away. As her taillights disappeared down Maplewood Drive, I finally exhaled. The quiet I'd wanted from the start had returned, only this time it came with the satisfying aftertaste of justice. I looked out over my pool, the water glimmering beneath the sunset. Peace, real peace. And maybe a little bit of victory. Still, I couldn't resist one last act of closure. That night, I replaced the old wooden sign by the pool gate with a new one. Simple black letters on white metal: private property. Members only. Underneath in smaller print, I added just 4 words. No Karens allowed. The morning after the photo shoot incident, I woke up to the sound of knocking on my door, sharp, rhythmic, and official. The kind of knock that tells you this isn't the pizza guy. When I opened it, 2 uniformed police officers were standing on my porch. One of them, the tall officer from the itch powder day, gave me a polite nod. "Mr. Lewis," he said evenly, "we received a report about ongoing disturbances related to your property." "Do you have a moment to talk?" I sighed. "Let me guess who filed it." The shorter officer checked his notepad. Mrs. Victoria Whitmore. Of course. I invited them in, offered coffee, and showed them the paperwork: my pool rental contracts, the HOA bylaws, even the police report from Victoria's trespassing and assault case. Both officers flipped through the pages quietly. The tall one finally said, "To be honest, sir, it looks like you're doing everything by the book." "That's the goal," I said, smiling. "Though I'm guessing she's not thrilled about it." He smirked. "You'd be right about that." Before they left, he added, "Just between us, she's been to the station twice this week trying to reopen her case. She claims you used a chemical warfare substance." I chuckled. "Tell her to take it up with the pool filter." They laughed, thanked me, and left. I thought that would be the end of it. But with Victoria, nothing ever ends cleanly. By the afternoon, she was back, this time in full HOA battle mode. Clipboard, Sunglasses. That tight, aggressive smile that promised chaos. I was lounging by the pool, enjoying the rare quiet when she stormed through the open gate. "Anthony," she barked, "we need to talk about your business operations." I set down my book, pretending to look surprised. "You mean my backyard?" She ignored the sarcasm. "You are in violation of HOA zoning regulations. Hosting public events is illegal without prior authorization." "Not according to Section 3 amperes," I said evenly, quoting her own bylaw word for word. 10 guests or fewer. Private events only. I even make them sign a clause that says, "No HOA liability." Her jaw tightened. "Don't play games. You're mocking this neighborhood." I leaned forward. "No, Victoria. I'm just using the same rules you spent years using against everyone else." For a moment she was silent. Then she snapped. "You think you're some kind of hero," she hissed. "You've turned this street into a circus. Everyone's talking about you. About me. You humiliated me." I met her glare calmly. "You humiliated yourself." I just hit record. That did it. She lunged forward, and before I could react, her hand slapped my cheek. Not hard enough to knock me down, but sharp enough to sting. I froze. So did she. For a split second, her face flickered between rage and regret. Then she doubled down. "You deserve that," she spat. "You've poisoned this place." Unfortunately for her, she just committed the dumbest mistake possible. Because the tall officer, yes, the same one, happened to be standing right outside my fence. He'd come back to return one of my documents that I'd accidentally left in his car. Talk about timing. He saw everything. "Ma'am," he said, stepping forward, voice stern, "put your hands where I can see them." Victoria spun around, startled. "Oh, officer." "This isn't he provoked me. I watched the whole thing," he said. "That's assault." Her eyes widened. "You can't arrest me for turn around, ma'am." When he cuffed her again, I didn't even bother hiding my smile this time. The irony was too perfect. Doug came running across the street, face pale. "Victoria, what are you doing?" She hit me, I said simply. Doug groaned, covering his face. "God, Vic." The officer read her rights as the neighbors began to gather again. It was déjà vu, the flashing lights, the whispers, the phones recording behind curtains. And there she was, the queen of HOA, once again being escorted to the back of a police car. This time she didn't scream or argue. She just stared at me through the window, pure hatred burning behind those expensive sunglasses. When the car drove off, the officer turned back to me. "I think that's the last time you'll have to deal with her." "I've heard that before," I said dryly. He chuckled. "Fair point. But between us, the DA's office is looking into her misuse of HOA funds. Someone sent them a flash drive full of evidence." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" He smiled. "Anonymous tip." I gave him a knowing grin. How convenient. After he left, I sat back on the patio chair, staring at the pool, the symbol of all this madness. The water rippled softly under the afternoon Sunday. It looked peaceful again, mine again. But I couldn't shake one thought: this wasn't just about a pool. It never was. It was about people like Victoria, people who think community means control, who hide behind authority to bully others. And finally she'd met someone who wouldn't bow. The next few days were quiet, unnervingly so. No more HOA letters, no footsteps on my deck, no music bleeding through the hedges. It was like the whole neighborhood had exhaled at once. Then one morning, I found another note, but this one was different. Handwritten, shaky, and surprisingly humble. "Anthony, I'm leaving Maplewood Heights. I wanted to tell you I never hated you. I just hated losing control. Take care of your pool. It's a beautiful thing. Victoria." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on my counter. Later that afternoon, I watched her SUV pull out of the driveway for the last time. There was no fanfare, no audience, just the faint hum of the engine and the final squeal of tires as she turned the corner. Doug stayed behind a few days to handle the sale. When he came by to drop off a set of HOA documents, he looked lighter, exhausted but free. "She was a hurricane, man," he said quietly. "And I just stood in the middle of it for too long." I nodded. "You're not the first person she's dragged into the storm." He gave me a small, grateful smile. "You know, despite everything, she respected you." "She never admitted it, but she did." I laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." He handed me a small envelope. "From the HOA board. I think you'll want to see this." Inside was a letter of appreciation, a formal thank you for providing evidence that led to uncovering financial mismanagement under Victoria's presidency. They'd found thousands of dollars in miscellaneous expenses that traced back to her personal accounts. They called it embezzlement. I called it karma. That night, I stood on my deck again, glass in hand, watching the water glisten under the lights. The reflection of the moon shimmered across the surface, calm and steady. No shouting, no trespassing, no chaos. Just peace, the one thing I'd wanted all along. And as I leaned against the railing, I muttered to myself, all that trouble, just because someone couldn't take a no. Then I smiled, remembering her note, the part about control. People like Victoria never understand that control isn't power, peace is. The next morning, I added one last finishing touch to my backyard. A small wooden sign right next to the pool gate. In neat hand-painted letters it read, "Private pool, keep out. Especially you, Victoria." My friends got a good laugh when they saw it. And for once I laughed too, the deep, genuine kind that comes only after you've won a long, exhausting battle. I didn't know it then, but that laugh would echo through Maplewood Heights for years. People would tell the story of the man who fought the HOA tyrant and won, not with rage, not with violence, but with patience, wit, and a little creativity. And somewhere out there I hoped Victoria saw it too. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learn what boundaries really meant. It's funny how silence can feel louder than noise. For months, my neighborhood had been a battlefield echoing with complaints, gossip, and the endless sound of Victoria's voice. But after she left Maplewood, Heights became eerily quiet. No more HOA letters, no more confrontations, no more fake smiles from behind clipped hedges. Just bird's wind and the soft hum of my pool filter the soundtrack of peace. At first, the calm felt almost unreal. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected her SUV to appear again, or her voice to ring out from across the fence. "Anthony, we need to talk about your pool maintenance schedule," but she was gone. Still, her name lingered like a ghost, whispered between neighbors, tossed around in group chats, printed in headlines. The local paper even ran a small piece titled, "Former HOA President Under Investigation for Financial Misconduct." They mentioned possible embezzlement of HOA funds and unlawful misuse of authority. The article didn't name me, but anyone who lived in Maplewood Heights knew exactly how it started. Within days, my neighbors' attitudes shifted completely. People who once avoided eye contact were now waving, smiling, bringing over homemade pies. The same residents who once hid behind her authority now wanted to thank me. It started with a knock on my door one afternoon. I opened it to find Mrs. Jenkins, a sweet retired teacher who lived 2 houses down. She held a small basket of cookies and a shy smile. "Anthony," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to her." We all wanted to, but none of us had the nerve. I chuckled. "You mean for surviving Victoria's reign?" She laughed a little guiltily. "We used to joke she ran this place like a mini dictatorship. Guess it's not a joke anymore." Soon after, others followed: a mechanic from across the street, a single mom from the corner house, even old Mr. Kim, who rarely spoke to anyone. They all had stories, unfair fines, threats, anonymous HOA complaints that mysteriously matched Victoria's tone. I listened, nodded, and realized something: this wasn't just about me. I hadn't just defended my property. I'd freed a neighborhood from a tyrant, and maybe in a small way that meant something. Within a week, the HOA called for elections to replace Victoria. For the first time ever, I got nominated. I almost laughed when they told me. Me, the guy who was almost banned from his own pool. The treasurer smiled. "That's exactly why. You care more about fairness than rules." I thought about it for a long moment, the idea of sitting in her old chair holding the same clipboard she once used as a weapon. I could have taken it just for irony's sake. But in the end, I declined. "I don't need power," I said. "I just need peace." The crowd applauded anyway. It felt strange but good, like closing a chapter you didn't even realize had been open too long. After the election, the new HOA president, a calm young woman named Rachel, stopped by my house. "I want to apologize on behalf of the board," she said sincerely. "What Victoria did was unacceptable. We've reviewed your case and we're refunding every fine she ever issued you." I smiled. "Don't worry about it. Consider it tuition. I learned more about HOA law than I ever wanted to know." She laughed. "You know, you might want to keep that footage somewhere safe. The investigators said it's going to help them close a few old complaints." And that's when she told me something I didn't expect. Apparently, the county audit found over $80 0-inches HOA funds missing, spent on beautification projects that never existed. Landscaping contracts, event budgets, even consulting fees under Victoria's name. She'd been milking the neighborhood for years, and no one had dared to question her, until now. When the news broke, everything came crashing down for her. Word spread that her real estate license had been suspended, her credit tanked, and her reputation in the local realtor community was finished. In a twisted way, it all felt poetic. The woman who once prided herself on appearances had destroyed her own. A few nights later, I was sitting on my porch, when Doug, her husband, walked up quietly. He looked different. The confident smirk was gone. He had dark circles under his eyes and hands buried in his jacket pockets. "Hey, Anthony," he said softly. "Doug." He hesitated for a long moment. "She's not coming back, you know. We sold the house." I figured. She's staying with her sister in Arizona. Trying to sort things out. "Good for her," I said, though my tone was neutral. He nodded slowly, then exhaled. "You know I should have stopped her. I saw what she was doing. The fines, the complaints, the way she talked down to everyone. I just didn't have the guts." I studied him. Fear's powerful, especially when someone hides behind authority. But doing nothing is still a choice. He nodded again, eyes on the ground. "Yeah, you're right." We stood in silence for a moment, two men who'd both lived under the shadow of the same woman, one from across the fence, the other from across the dinner table. Before he left, he turned back and said quietly, "For what it's worth, thanks for standing up to her. You did what none of us could." After he drove off, I looked at the empty house across the street. The for sale sign now read sold, and the porch light that once glared at me every night was finally dark. That was the moment it hit me the war was over. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the quiet sink in. The next morning, I decided to celebrate in the most fitting way possible by hosting a real neighborhood gathering. No HOA agendas, no fake smiles, no rules, just people, real neighbors. We grilled burgers, played music, laughed. Kids splashed in the pool with permission this time, and adults toasted to finally being free. At one point, Mrs. Jenkins raised her glass and shouted, "To Anthony, the man who ended the HOA tyranny." Everyone cheered. I laughed, embarrassed, but touched. To common sense, I shouted back. May it never go out of style. The sound of laughter filled the air, honest, unforced. It was the first real community moment Maplewood Heights had seen in years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water orange and gold, I realized something simple but profound. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the result of standing your ground even when it's uncomfortable. Victoria had built her kingdom on control. I'd rebuilt mine on boundaries. And in the end, that made all the difference. Later that night, as the guests left and the yard quieted again, I caught my reflection in the water, older, calmer, and maybe a little wiser. I raised my glass one last time to no one in particular. "Here's to peace, and the price you have to pay to keep it." The ripples shimmered, carrying the light across the surface like a promise. For the first time since moving to Maplewood Heights, I felt like I truly belonged. No more HOA letters, no more power plays, no more Karen wars. Just me, my home, and the water still clear and finally mine. A month passed after the neighborhood barbecue and peace finally settled into Maplewood Heights like a long overdue sunrise. The laughter from that night still echoed in my head every time I sat on my porch sipping coffee and watching the quiet street. For the first time in years, I could open my mailbox without finding a complaint, a fine, or a threat disguised as friendly advice. The only letters now were coupons and a thank you note from the new HOA president, Rachel, who wrote, "Thank you for restoring sanity to our community." I thought that was the end of it, the final curtain call of the HOA saga. But, as life tends to do, it had one last twist waiting for me. It started on a random Tuesday morning. I was cleaning the pool filters when I noticed a man in a crisp suit walking toward my driveway holding a briefcase. He had that sharp professional look, part lawyer, part accountant, part trouble. "Mr. Anthony Lewis," he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. He extended his hand. "Detective Alan Morris, County Financial Crimes Division. We're wrapping up the investigation into your former HOA president, Mrs. Victoria Whitmore." I straightened a bit, heart kicking up. Oh, that. I figured it was already over. He smiled faintly. "Not quite. We've uncovered a lot more than expected, and it seems you played a bigger role in solving it than you know." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed reports, bank statements, and screenshots of HOA transactions. Some of them had Victoria's signature. Others had forged ones. She'd been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, travel, luxury goods, even renovations to her private vacation home, he explained. "But your footage and the files you anonymously submitted gave us a timeline we couldn't get anywhere else." I raised an eyebrow. "You're saying my petty revenge helped a county investigation," he chuckled. "More than helped. It started it. Because of that evidence, we froze 3 of her accounts and recovered over $90,000 in stolen HOA dues." I let out a low whistle. "Guess she really was allergic to honesty." The detective smiled. "You might find this interesting too." He handed me a printed property record. At the top of the page in bold letters it read, Property foreclosure, 281 Maplewood Drive. New owner Anthony Lewis. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of joke. Wait, what? He explained. Her house went up for auction after she defaulted on her mortgage. Apparently her attorney listed you as one of the eligible buyers due to your previous claim in the trespassing and damages case. The bank accepted your bid automatically since no one else matched it. I blinked speechless. You're telling me I own her house? He nodded. Technically, yes. The paperwork's already processed. You'll get the deed in a few days. I had to laugh. The irony was too perfect. The woman who'd once claimed my pool as her community property had lost her house to me. When the detective left, I stood there for a long moment, staring at her old yard across the street. The lawn had gone wild grass, knee-high paint peeling from the porch railings, the once perfect roses turning brown. It was strange. For so long that house had symbolized control, her empire, her throne. Now it was empty, silent, and mine. The next weekend, I walked over with a set of keys the bank had mailed. The door creaked when I opened it. Inside, the air was stale, a mix of perfume and dust, like someone had tried too hard to cover up decay. Her furniture was gone, but the energy lingered. The walls were lined with old HOA plaques and motivational quotes like "Leadership starts with confidence." I almost snorted. I walked through each room slowly, half expecting to hear her voice again, shouting about community standards or property violations. But there was nothing, just echoes. Then I stepped into the backyard and stopped. From this angle, I could see my pool, my deck, my patio perfectly framed through the fence line. The same view she'd used to justify calling it a shared amenity. The irony hit me like sunlight through a window. Standing there, I realized this wasn't just victory, it was closure. Every fight, every insult, every ridiculous fine had led to this exact moment. I sat down on the back steps of her porch, staring at my home across the street. It looked peaceful, glowing under the afternoon sunday. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her, just pity. Because in the end, Victoria hadn't been my enemy, she'd been her own. Her pride, her control, her need to dominate every inch of life, that's what destroyed her. I decided to turn her house into something new, not another rental or an investment, but something that could undo the bitterness she'd left behind. By summer, I'd cleaned it up, repainted the walls, fixed the garden, and turned it into a guest suite for visiting friends and family. I even gave it a name, the Blue Haven Annex. When the renovations finished, I threw a small gathering to celebrate nothing big, just a few neighbors, some food, and soft music. As we stood on the porch, Mrs. Jenkins raised her glass again. To Anthony, who turned chaos into calm, everyone laughed, clinked glasses, and for once there was no trace of tension in the air. I looked around the people, the houses, the laughter, and felt a strange peace wash over me. The HOA hadn't just been fixed. The neighborhood had healed. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch of Victoria's old house staring at my pool glowing blue under the moonlight. It looked different from this side. Smaller maybe, quieter. But it also looked like victory, not the gloating kind, but the kind that comes from surviving something ugly and still finding beauty in it. As the crickets hummed and the night breeze carried the faint scent of chlorine, I whispered to myself, "You see that, Victoria? You finally made this place better. Just not the way you thought." Then I smiled and headed back home. Looking back now, I realize this story was never really about a pool or an HOA. It was about boundaries, the invisible lines that protect peace, respect, and dignity. People like Victoria exist everywhere. The ones who believe kindness is weakness and control is power. But the truth is, control without respect always collapses. Sooner or later, arrogance drowns in the very water it stirs. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean fighting loud. Sometimes it means staying calm, collecting proof, and letting karma write the final chapter. And if you're lucky, that chapter ends with laughter, a quiet backyard, and a pool that finally belongs to no one but you. What about you? Have you ever dealt with a Karen who pushed too far? Tell me your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life HOA justice tales like this one.